I would like to start with the prayer, which we also used during the synod. It was our prayer, which was said every day during the sessions. And as you know, it also in the preparation for the synod, we had it, I think, in all our dioceses. So you can pray with me as long as you are muted, because with the Zoom meetings always it's a problem to pray together. But I will pray it loudly, and you can also pray it while you're sitting before the screen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. We stand before you, Holy Spirit, as we gather together in your name, with you alone to guide us. Make yourself at home in our hearts. Teach us the way we must go and how we are to pursue it. We are weak and sinful. Do not let us promote disorder. Do not let ignorance lead us down the wrong path, nor partiality influence our actions. Let us find in you our unity, so that we may journey together to eternal life and not stray from the way of truth and what is right. All this we ask of you, who are at work in every place and time, in the communion of the Father and the Son, forever and ever. Amen. Yeah, before I really start with the experiences I made in the synod, I would like to come with some few remarks. And then afterwards, I will guide you a little bit through the days of the synod, and also come in on the synthesis document, which came out and which is summarizing what we have done during these weeks. I think we all know the gospel, the Easter gospel, which we very soon are coming to hear. There, Mary Magdalene was entrusted the task to bring the experience of the risen Christ back to the disciples. And today, or always when I'm traveling around with the synod's experience, I feel a little bit like Mary Magdalene. Because I have made this experience during the synod, and now it's a kind of the task to give witness on that, and hopefully to take you along and have a little bit of sense of what has happened there. I've been through an experience during the synod, which I'm really, really grateful for. And when people ask me, when I came back, what was it like? It was one of the most difficult questions to ask on. What was it like? I can say now, after some weeks and months, first of all, it had been a privilege to be involved in this very, very big event where people from the whole world were meeting in Rome. Next one I would like to use it next is it was a learning experience. Although I have in my own community as a missionary or sister of the Presbyterian international community, so I know about other cultures, but nevertheless, it was also a learning experience, and says, first of all, to learn myself better, to know my own prejudices, my own ideas, what our church should look, but also learning experience in understanding other cultures and other traditions a bit more. And the third one, I call it the ascetic experience. And what do I mean with that? It was an exhausting experience. And some said it was also tiring. After 4 weeks, we really were finished. But it was also ascetic on an every day in the discipline of prayer, and there was a discipline of listening, the discipline of silence. This was really, really part of the whole plenary sessions. And the discipline of silence, it also meant that we should know when to talk and when not to talk. And for some of us, it was really a hard discipline. You know, most of the bishops and cardinals who are used to come to the synods, they used to prepare papers at home, and then they come to the synod, and then they talk out what they had prepared. But the synod was totally different. And this is what all the members of the synod also said. Now I have to try if I can go on with my, yes. This synod was a little bit different than other synods. I mean, you might have heard about the synod of the youth, the synod of Amazonas, the synod on the family, and so on. But this one was really special because it is not yet finished. We only have had the first part of the synod, and now we are in the phase in between. And in October this year, the second part will start. And then after October, the synod will come to the end. So it was really, this was something new, that it takes such a long time. As you can hear, the opening of the synod was in October 21 already. And then from October 21 to August 22, we had this period, what is called the diocesan phase. You know, where all these questions were given to the bishops' conferences, and we put it out to the different dioceses, to the different parishes, and asked the people in the parishes to answer and come with their ideas, because the Pope said, I want to hear, I want to listen to what is really moving on the grassroots in the Catholic Church. In between, we had then the meeting of the European continent. It was on 59th February 23 in Prague. Like all the other continents, people met in the continental phase around their culture, around their traditions, whatever, and they were discussing these topics. And then last year, October, we had the first part of the synod, and now in this year, October, we will have the second part of the synod. So we are now in this phase in between. And I think it's a very good time to give you this this presentation today, because we soon will experience the in-between phase between Christ's death and resurrection. So it's really fitting to have it today. Something new was also the people who were invited to the synod. Normally, it's the way that every bishops' conference, according to the size of the bishops' conference, will appoint 1, 2, or 3 bishops, and they are sent to the synod. And that time, the Pope also invited lay people. This is nothing special because we had it before, but the very new thing is that just look here, something was oh, a little slower. Sorry, I will take a little talk a little bit slower. I don't see my chat. Yeah, okay. I am back again. But that time, during the synod, it was the first time that also lay people could talk and vote. And you can here see the members. We had 375 members. There were 275 bishops, just over 50 priests and religious, and 45 lay people, women and men. And it was very funny because we, the lay people and the religious and the priests, it didn't have a common name, so we were called the non-bishops. So we, the non-bishops, were approximately 100, and half of them were women. This was also new in the synod. On top of that, there were 8 guests or observers called from other denominations. We had some people from the Lutheran Church, from the Pentecostal churches, the Methodists from different Orthodox churches, and then 75 men who were functioning as experts, as theological advisors, and some of them employees from the Synod Secretariat. So this was also, the setup was different to other synods, and also you will see the later way of sitting together, because normally the bishops and cardinals were sitting like in a cinema, yeah, in these different rows. And now, you know it from the media, we were sitting in table groups. But before we started that one, oh, it went back, sorry. Hello. So before we started, all of us, we were transported from Rome to a place a little bit outside of Rome, which is called Sacrofano. It's like a little village with different houses where we could sleep. Very big chapel, as you can see it, or church in the middle of the place. And there we started with a 3 days retreat. This was also new, that Bishop Synod is starting with the we had these 3 days together with Father Timothy Radcliffe. He was a long time General Superior of the Dominican Order. And together with him, we had every day 2 units in the morning where he gave us some speeches. And then we were invited to private prayer. And for me, it was really amazing to experience this many people, about 300, sitting together before the Holy Sacrament, lay people, women, men, priests, deacons, bishops, cardinals, religious, and praying to understand what this synod should be about. One of the cardinals, he told in our small group we were meeting in the afternoon, he said, you know, with all the other synods, I knew what will happen. I prepare my papers at home, I had to give a speech, we had to discuss, but with this synod, I don't know where we will go, where we will end, what is going to happen. So I'm a bit afraid. And this was something many of the bishops and cardinals said, because no one of us knew where we will come to end. And Pope Francis, he took it up in one of his first speeches. He said, if we would know where to go and where to end, we didn't need a synod. The synod is about the Holy Spirit. He will guide us and he will show us the way. And during his speeches, Padre Radcliffe used 2 Bible passages. The one was the Lord's transfiguration on the mountain and the other one, the journey of the disciples to Emmaus. And he used these 2 passages to present to us important topics in preparation for the synod. The first topic was Jesus preparing the disciples on the mountain to be, and he said, servants of hope. This was a very special expression. He always came in again and again. He said, your task is to be servants of hope. When you come back to your parishes, to your dioceses, you should be the one who give on the hope for our church to the people. And the second topic, it was very special, the church as a home. And there he said, we all have different understandings of a home, what a home is about. And especially in the church, we had during the last 100, 200 years, the understanding of the church, this is we, there's a home, here we feel at home, and out of the church there are the others. So we have to take care of our home. Then he said, now we have really to understand that the church is something different. It is this kind of home, yes, but it also has to open up the doors so that everyone has a chance to come in. And this was a very nice understanding of being a home for all. He talked about the importance of listening, of dialogue, and creating a space of trust, of respect, and dignity. And this especially in these times of polarization, criticism, and whatever. And the last topic he was talking about was the topic of authority. And there, when he started his talk, I thought, oh my goodness, now it's about the authority of the bishops and the cardinals. No, no. He said, every baptized in the church has his or her own authority because of their baptism. The ordained people, the priests, the bishops, deacons, they have their authority. The religious, they have their authority. And every baptized person has their own authority. And the task of a bishop is that he has to learn to see all these different types of authorities as a symphony that must sound together. This was a wonderful picture, actually, I thought. This is the task of a bishop. After the 3 days, we so entered in the ascetic experience, as I said. And we started with the Holy Mass, Peter Square, where all the delegates, including the lay people, went together with the bishops, cardinals, and the Holy Father in the entrance procession. So it was a very, very long procession we had on St. Peter's Square. And then we met in the Synod Hall, and I have a little video here. I hope you can see it when I start it. Otherwise, please send a chat that I know that it is not working. So I try to start it. You will see all the bishops and the members in the Synod Hall, and then a deacon is coming in a procession. He will bring in the Word of God, the Bible. This is what I have here. Oh. Oh, no, no. So, yes. I think I heard that it was a little bit difficult to see. The internet connection is not very stable here. So I hope we are back all together. Um, you know this instrumentum laboris. This is a working document for the synod. So from all the dioceses in the whole world, the Secretariat collected the answers to all these questions, and they made this document out of it, a working document, Instrument Laboris. And as you also might know, it has three topics: participation and mission. And each of these three topics were divided into 5 subtopics. This you can see here. And every participant had to choose at home before the synod one of these subtopics where he or she would like to work on. So when we came to Rome, we found a badge on our hotel room, and on the badges was written which topic we had chosen, which table we had to go on, and which language we had chosen. And we spent for one of the 3 topics a whole week. And the procedure was the same, and the structure of this days was actually the same for all the first 3 weeks. We got, first of all, a spiritual input from Father Radcliffe on the topic. Then we got from the experts a theological input. And then that was also very new, but very helpful. We got 3 testimonies from people all over the world who had worked in their parishes with the questions of the synod. So they just gave witness how they worked on it and what it meant for them to be heard. And in this way, we actually started into the topic always in the same way. We listened to the Bible, we listened to a theological perspective, and we listened to the testimony from the universal perspective. And what then happened was actually the very, very best thing after my view of the synod. You can see here these tables. We had altogether 35 of these tables, and at each table were sitting 12 people. At each table, there was a facilitator, the one who was trained, the person to lead us and guide us through the method which is called conversation in the spirit. It was very funny for us in the beginning, this conversation in the spirit, because nobody knew what is it about. But the method was we had to prepare everyone at home a 10 minutes a presentation on the topic, not more than 10 minutes. So it was really structured. It was the view of our own and of our parishes and our dioceses we brought along from home. This we had to share. And each one at the table had 10 minutes, then was a little pause, the next one at the table, 10 minutes around. After this first round, there was a silence of 10 minutes. I thought by myself, yes, it's time to talk for the Holy Spirit. So there was silence, there was prayer. And you could see in all the tables around, people were just sitting with closed eyes. They were in prayer really to feel what has touched me from what I heard from the others. So I have given my view, and now it was time to listen to the others. Then, after 10 minutes silence, the second round started. In the second round, we should say to the others what I have heard from the others. What did touch my heart? Where did my heart burn? Where did I feel? This is something very special, what you said. So it was a step from the I to the we, I to the you. The one was the other said. We were asked to listen very carefully. And I can tell you it was a bit exhausting because normally we are not used to listen to so intense. We could make notes during the listening phase. And after the second round, there were again 5 minutes of silence, 5 minutes of prayers, where we just tried once again to feel, where is God talking to me, to us now? After the second round, we came into a conversation. And the idea of the conversation now was to prepare a report of 2 minutes from our table, which we had to share with the plenary, with all the others. So we were discussing what of these topics we heard in our table are so important that we like to share them with the others in the whole hall. This we did. So we heard 35 2-minute reports. And after 5 reports, there were always a time of silence and a time of prayer again. So you can imagine if you listen to 35 reports, it's also not done in just a morning session. We used a whole day of listening to the different reports. After the reports, after we have heard 35 of this report, there was an open discussion. So everyone who felt, I would like to add something, I would like to explain something, I would like to comment on one of the things, could do so. And the method was also very nicely, because every one of us had a tablet and you could press a button and then you came into the queue of the people talking. And as you know, there are always people who like to talk very long, but we only had 2 minutes to talk. So after 2 minutes, there came a gong. Then you knew I have to come to the end. If you didn't come to the end, all of a sudden your microphone was slowly switched off. So nobody could hear anymore what you were saying. This was also a kind of education in keeping the time. And what happened during this discussion was also very interesting, because nevertheless, although the topic was a completely different, some people, now mainly bishops who were used to talk on the synod, they had already prepared at home something they wanted to say. So under this discussion, they put out their papers and they read their statement. And it was interesting, especially when the Holy Father was present. There were a lot of these statements they wanted to give. And these statements were sometimes totally out of topic. Also, we were discussing, let's say, of the role of women in the church. And then all of a sudden, one of the bishops talked about the political situation in South Sudan. And I thought in the beginning, oh, no, why does it have to be? Can't he stay to the topic? But it was very nicely done, because he will listen to. He had his 2 minutes to talk, and after this 2 minutes, the time was over, and we started again with the discussion we actually had in the plenary session. As I said before, the technical equipment was really perfect. I know the Vatican from the last ad limina visitation of our bishops' conference, and at that time you couldn't get an internet connection in the Vatican. I think because they were afraid or whatever, but it was not possible to come onto the internet. Now, in these times, you can see it here, we had 4 big screens on every table. In the middle, you can see a camera, and the places we had were really, we had to stick to, because the camera was installed like this. If you press the button you wanted to talk and it was your turn, the camera turned around so that you and your picture was on the screen. So if you changed the places, there was a mess. Some tried, but it was not a good idea. 4 screens, a camera, a microphone, and this little tablet if you wanted to talk. And this was also interesting because there are always people who always like to talk. But if you once pressed the button and had the chance to talk in the plenary, the next time you wanted to talk, you came onto the last place in the queue, so that others who didn't talk yet had the chance to come before. Also, the Holy Father had his tablet, as you can see. So after this discussion in the plenary, also, we had the first round, everyone said his own things. The second round, we listened to the others. The third round, we discussed it on the table. The fourth, we gave the 2 minutes report in the synod hall. The fifth, the discussion among us, free discussion. And now we came back into our table groups for the next step, which was we had from all what we heard to prepare a document, 2 pages from our table. So we came back and we discussed once again from all what we now heard from our group, from the plenary session, from the 2 minutes reports, what is for us the most important things we want to put in the document of 2 pages. This document was so sent into the secretariat, and we had to vote on our own report. Only a 2/3 majority went through. So the secretaries at the table of us, every table had a secretary, they had really a lot of things to do. And this order of talking on the tables, talking in the plenary, discussing in the plenary, going back to the table and make the final report, this was repeated for all the 3 main topics during the 3 weeks. The working time was every day from 8:45 in the morning to 12:30, and then we had a long break at 4 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And we had only free on Saturday afternoon and the Sunday. So it was really a commitment to the synod which was asked from us. The last week, the 4th week, was a bit different. Here we had 2 days off. We were very happy about that. Because this expert, they had to write the final, not the final, the synthesis document out of these reports they got from our tables. So it was 35 2-pages reports 3 times. So these people, really, I admire them. They had really a lot to do. And another topic we discussed during the 4th week was also, how do we want to go on after the first part of the synod on the way to the second part? And some people of us, included myself, I'm a German, and Germans, you know, they like things to be in order. To see, okay, we get the message, you should do this and this and this. And if this one is finished, we start with the next one and you prepare that and that. But this method now, we were asked, how do you want to go on? It meant that there was no plan. how to go on. And some of us said, you know, I feel like I'm sitting in a plane by building the plane. This was really also a feeling of being a little bit unsecure, but it was the very best method for the Holy Spirit. What we also discussed, oh no, there's another one coming. We had some special prayer sessions during the 3 weeks. As you know, the war in the Holy Land broke out, so we had a rosary prayer together with the people on St. Peter's Square. And we had a special prayer for migrants. This is this picture here, together with the Holy Father. And we made also a pilgrimage to the catacombs outside Rome, San Callisto catacombs. And here we really got the impression we are in the roots of our faith. Here the first martyrs are buried. So here we are together with these people who gave everything for their faith. And in their footpath we are walking today also.
Hello.
One of the very important things in the 4th week was the draft of the synthesis document. So these experts were working really hard to put all the reports together to the synthesis document. We got it on paper. We were going home a half a day, reading everything, making notes, and we were asked to come with modifications, some changes, some additions, some things we thought, no, it doesn't have to come in, whatever. We met again in our table groups. We discussed the modifications. We voted on them. Only 2/3 majority could come through. And imagine there had been at the end 1,200 modifications from all the members.
Jag
And
lyssnar
100.
igenom ett föredrag.
Sorry, I heard something. Is something... Everything okay?
Nej, jag lyssnar på ett föredrag. Ja, jag är snart 20 minuter kvar.
Okay. And 120 individual modifications. So these people in the background, they had really to work in this 1,400 modifications into the draft and into the text. So we met again, and then happened something which was, first of all, very tiring, because the whole document of 42 pages were read out for us loudly. Several people were reading it in Italian, and we had the translation in English in the ear. And 4 hours we were listening to this document. Some of us said it was very tiring, but I made the experience it was a good idea to read it out, because all of a sudden we could identify, for example, at our table, this is the expression, this is the formulation we had and we gave in. So we could really have the feeling that what we did came in the final document. After all that, we voted on this final, not final, but synthesis document. This tablets. And because we discussed it so much in the beginning and during the weeks, we had 80% yes votes on the synod text. There were some special points we got only 80%, others 95% yes votes, and it was only possible to vote with yes or no, but not with abstention. The synthesis document, it has a very interesting structure. To every point, there are 3 titles. The first one, convergences. What do we agree on this topic? The second one, topics that still need to be clarified. So where we are not really in harmony together. And the third one, concrete proposals. And this structure is really helpful. I don't know if you have read the synthesis document yet. I really can encourage you to do so. You have here the three main topics. This is the structure, the introduction of the content, the face of the church. Part 2, topic mission, all disciples, all missionaries. And the third one, communion, weaving bonds, building communities. And I took some single moments out of the document. These are just some passages because I think they are very helpful to understand how it works. One passage is about this method, conversation in the spirit. And the document says, conversation in the spirit is a tool that, despite its limitations, is fruitful in listening authentically and recognizing what the Spirit wants to say to communities. It has invoked joy, wonder, and gratitude, and has been experienced as a pathway to renewal that transforms individuals, groups, and the whole church. And this is really right. All the people in the hall, they said this is a wonderful method also for difficult topics, hot topics, because all the emotions are taken out. Everyone can say what she or he feels or means. Everyone is listened to, and we tried in an atmosphere of respect to come to a common conclusion. Then one very special topic, the role of women. And I took it out because I wanted to give you a little impression of the language of this document. In my opinion, it is because women were also involved to do this document, because it has another type of language and many, many other church documents. For example, concerning the role of women, the document says, our convergences. During the plenary session, we experienced the beauty of the mutual interaction between women and men. Together, we affirm the call from the previous stages of the process and ask the Church to grow in its commitment to understand and accompany women pastorally and sacramentally. Women want to share the spiritual experience of the path to holiness in the different stages of life, as young women, as mothers, in relationships with friends, in family life at all ages, in working life and in consecrated life. They cry out for justice in societies still heavily characterized by sexual violence, economic inequality, and the tendency to treat them as objects. They bear the scars of human trafficking, forced migration, and wars. Accompaniment and strong support for women go hand in hand. Maybe you can feel a little bit the melody of this language. Still convergences. Women make up most of those in our pews and are often the first missionaries of the faith in the family. Consecrated women, both in contemplative and apostolic life, are a fundamental distinctive gift, sign, and witness in our midst. The long history of women missionaries, saints, theologians, and mystics is also a powerful source of nourishment and inspiration for women and men today. These are the convergences. Now we came to the topics which have to be explored more. The document says, different positions have been expressed regarding women's access to the diaconal ministry. For some, this step would be unacceptable because they consider it a discontinuity with tradition. For others, however, opening access for women to the diaconate would restore the practice of the early church. Others still discern it as an appropriate and necessary response to the signs of the times, faithful to the tradition, and one that would find an echo in the hearts of many who seek new energy and vitality in the church. Some express concern that the request speaks of a worrying anthropological confusion, which, if granted, would marry the church to the spirit of the age. So here you can see this is really the different point of views which are summarized in the document, standing side by side. So you really can see everyone is heard and the arguments of everyone come into this document. Now the proposals. Theological and pastoral research on the access of women to the diaconate should be continued, benefiting from consideration of the results of the commissions specially established by the Holy Father, and from the theological, historical, and exegetical research already undertaken. If possible, the results of this research should be presented to the next session of the Assembly, which means now here in October. There's a need to ensure that liturgical text and church documents are more attentive to the use of language that takes into equal consideration both men and women, and also includes a range of words, images, and narratives that draw more widely on women's experience. We propose that women receive appropriate formation to enable them to be judges in all canonical processes. These are just some examples of the proposals. There are many more in the document. Here you can see all of us. If you have the courage and the time, find where I am. I can just give a hint. It's in the first row on the left side. So, and now the question is how we are going on. So we got in December 23 a letter from the Secretariat of the Synod with one main question we have to deal about. The question is, how can we be a synodal church in mission? And this question shall be dealt with on two levels. The first level is a level on the local church, which means the dioceses, the parishes. And there the question is, how can we enhance the differentiated co-responsibility in the mission of all the members of God? And it refers to some of the chapters of the synthesis document. The second level is a relation between churches, between groupings of churches, and with the Bishop of Rome. And this should be dealt with on the level of the Bishops' Conference. Again, like in the first synod period, out of the responses, there has to be drawn up a summary in the Bishops' Conference of a maximum of 8 pages, and it has to be sent to the Secretariat of the Synod latest by 15th of May. And on the basis of these answers from all over the world, the new Instrumentum Laboris for the second session will be drafted. Meanwhile, there is has happened something. The Synod has asked in the document about the priests, it says there is a need to find ways to involve the clergy, deacons, priests, bishops, more actively in the synodal process over the next year. A synodal church cannot do without their voices, experiences, and contributions. We need to better understand the reasons why some have felt resistance to the synodal process. These are experiences from the different parts of the world, which were nearly similar, that many of the clergy were not really involved in the process. And what did the Holy Father do? He called now for a meeting of parish priests. It's in April 28 to May the 2nd in Sacrofano, the same place where we had our retreat. And during this meeting, the parish priests will use the same method, the conversation in the spirit, and prepare their view on the synod and on the topic. From every bishops' conference, according to the size and the number of bishops, we can send priests. Unfortunately, for our bishops' conference, it means only one priest we can send. I sent a request to the Secretariat of the Synod and asking if we in the Nordic countries not at least can send one priest from every country, because it's very difficult for one priest to cover all the 5 countries. This picture I took during one of the masses in St. Peter, you know that. Yeah, and with this picture, I will stop now talking and I stop the sharing of the screen. Now, I hope you can see me again, at least I can see you also. And I give the word and the